Until the coronavirus became the news, the whole world was screaming. We were literally counting the days when the whole planet would be unfit for human existence. Through climate catastrophe, massive unemployment, wealth concentration. Should we go back to that world? The choice is ours. If we want to create a world of zero net carbon emission, a world of zero unemployment, a world where there will be no concentration of wealth, just do it. Nothing is impossible for human beings. All the rebuilding actions must lead up to the creation of a socially, economically, and environmentally conscious economy. The time is now.
Nothing is impossible for human beings. While COVID has shown us that truly change can happen overnight. After COVID, can we make change happen again to save our planet and our societies? Welcome to our session, Evolution or Revolution, the Role of Companies in the Purpose Economy. Thank you for joining us from the EVPA annual conference, and thanks to the EVPA team for hosting us today. My name is Daniel Nowack. I'm the Managing Director of Yunus Social Business, and I will lead you through our conversation today. We have a really exciting group of speakers today, of corporate executives, innovators in the financial markets, and social entrepreneurs from large organizations that can help you get a 360 degree on the various factors that we need to truly turn around companies and transform them to what we call net positive contributors to people, planet, and society. On September 13th, 1970, almost to the day 5 years ago, Milton Friedman published his piece, "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." It marked the beginning of the shareholder primacy as we've known it for years now, a relentless focus on profits. But today, leading business associations such as the Business Roundtable, as well as the World Economic Forum, are calling for yet another paradigm shift. An economy that optimizes value for all stakeholder groups, a stakeholder economy. And we've seen lots of buzz around this topic. Larry Fink and BlackRock have pledged to vote against companies and its executives that do not make progress on climate-related issues, that do not decarbonize their value chains. The Business Roundtable has obviously prominently signed a pledge with 200 CEOs to put stakeholders first and not only shareholders. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, was just recently the first Wall Street regulator to flag climate change as an inherent risk to the financial system, and therefore is demanding changes to corporate disclosure and changes in the investment strategies of asset managers. Individual companies have pledged their commitment. UBS recently announced that they would recommend sustainable investments over traditional companies. Microsoft wants to become carbon positive, but at the same time, we are eagerly waiting for follow-through. BlackRock itself has been criticized for a very mixed voting record in the last voting session, voting on some climate-related issues against it, voting against those motions, and also failing to oust executives that clearly do not follow through on climate-related targets. And a very recent study by Tyler Rye of Wharton has shown that during COVID, the signatories of the Business Roundtable have actually also fallen short on their commitment. They paid out on average 20% more dividends to shareholders compared to non-signatories, and they were 20% more likely to announce layoffs than non-signatories during COVID. And maybe it's even important to know that when Milton made his remarks, the top income rate in the US was 70%, compared to 37% and 28% in the 80s. The corporate tax rate was close to 50% compared to 21% today. So companies were making their contribution at least to taxes. And today we're not even talking now about applying tax optimization schemes where profits increasingly move to tax havens. We're all aware of Amazon, who did not pay a single dollar in federal income taxes in the US in 2018, but they did make progress. They did actually pay $162 million in federal income tax in 2019, if you exclude deferred taxes, which effectively amounts to a staggering 1.2% of their $13.3 billion in profits. So clearly we seem to be way off from truly making companies net positive contributors to planet, people, and society. So how can we accelerate that journey? We at Yunus Social Business, we believe in the power of business to solve social or environmental problems. We are even crazy enough to think that there is a form of business out there that puts this problem first and only focuses on that while reinvesting all profits instead of handing it to shareholders. Our corporate accelerators are helping hundreds of social businesses connect with companies, and we've launched more than a dozen corporate social businesses that have triggered a really exciting journey for our corporate partners, a transformation journey. Because we see these initiatives not just as those small initiatives that they are, but as a way to trigger culture and mindset shifts at large organizations. And our previous research of business as unusual highlights the benefits of that. Impact first, social business initiatives reshape everybody's thinking, how to use corporate assets and resources for good. They give new life to corporate purpose, and they let action follow pledges that we so much see, but more need follow on for. And that journey is not easy. We understand that transformation takes time. It needs corporate leaders, it needs employees to understand the intricacies of social impact and cultural change within large organizations. And that is why we are super excited to present a range of speakers today that can talk about the various angles of corporate transformation for good. We will start with a session focused on the role of executives in purpose transformation. I'm very glad to have Shannon, Jayanth, and Joachim here today, who will be talking about their work as executives in various companies around the world. After that, we will have a short intervention by Paul Allard, CEO and co-founder of Impact Finance. Paul and his team have created an impact rating agency that works with asset managers across the world, that goes beyond ESGs as an impact evaluation system and uses the IMP framework, the Impact Management Project framework, to evaluate positive and negative impact of companies. And we'll close with insights from Mercedes and Andreas, who've both been inspiring social entrepreneurs at their companies. They make corporate change happen from within. We hope you're as excited as we are about the session that's in front of us. Please use the chat functionality to share your insights and questions. We may not be able to answer all of them. We'll try to integrate them into the conversation or the Q&A session at the end, but please do share your thoughts. And with that, I hand over to my colleague in crime, Saskia Bruysten, co-founder and CEO of Yunus Social Business, to get us started with this very first session.
Thanks so much, Daniel, for setting the scene that I think was really helpful to get the broader grasp of what we're trying to get at here. So let's jump right into the panel. And obviously, first things first, let's actually introduce the awesome panel that we have with us here today. So ladies first, Shannon Klinger is the Chief Legal Officer of Novartis, and she's also a member of the Executive Board. In the pre-briefing, I just heard she also calls herself the chief cheerleader of ESG-related topics within Novartis. So that's a beautiful new title that I wasn't aware of yet, but thanks for that, Shannon. I had the pleasure to meet Shannon earlier this year in Davos, where we were also speaking together on a panel around how she's been trying to help change the path of Novartis and how she's helped working with and created Novartis Social Business, which is a group of social business organizations that belong to the Novartis group and that focus on providing healthcare and health education to the poorest. So thanks, Shannon. Welcome to the panel. The second person I'd like to introduce is Jayanth Bhuvaraghan. I hope I got that right properly, Jayanth. He's the Chief Mission Officer of Essilor, also an uncommon title, which I love. So we have to talk more about that in a second as well, Jayanth. Essilor has, among other things, created the iMitra social business, which provides affordable glasses as well as vision testing and training for vision entrepreneurs, I would call it vision micro entrepreneurs. So people in rural areas in developing countries that actually do the testing for vision and actually then also sell glasses. So really exciting initiative that you guys have created. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Joachim Drees. He's a former CEO of MAN Truck and Bus, And we have met many years ago in a session together with Professor Yunus, talking about social business at that point in time. And Joachim has basically said, hey, how can I use social business to really change the culture within MAN? Launched that process through launching the so-called MAN Impact Accelerator, working with many social business startups in the mobility and logistics space over the last 3-4 years. So this is the fantastic panel that we have here today. I'm really glad that you could all make it and really share your perspective. So I guess we've all heard in the intro from Daniel that obviously we have a very short but important window of opportunity to actually change the role of companies from, let's say, previously net extractors or polluters of society to really net positive contributors to society. So really make that shift from negative to positive. And I really have the feeling that, significant numbers of key decision makers are slowly but surely are coming around the corners and actually understanding that that makes sense. And they're coming around to this thought. The big question is, how do we move from that thought into concrete action, moving away from just announcements to real impact? And that's really the question that I'd like to discuss with you. And I'd like to look at 3 different perspectives. So first, what is actually the role of executives in this change? What can executives really do? So that's why we have you here, to learn like what executives can do. And then I want to ask you guys also, what do shareholders need to do? And also potentially, what could you learn from social business entrepreneurs? So these are kind of the 3 different segments in the panel that I'd like to discuss with you. And I'd like to jump right in with that first question around executives. So we always hear change has to come from the top. But at the same time, I think we all know that corporations are big tankers. And even if the top wants to make change, it's not easy. So Shannon, tell me, is it realistic that the executives are actually the ones that are going to make the change? Or are we expecting too much from them? What hurdles have you been facing internally to actually make a change in a gigantic tanker as Novartis?
Yeah, so thank you, Saskia. It's a great question. And I have to say, I come at this from a position of privilege in that for over a decade, Novartis has been fervently focused on its social business efforts, starting in India and expanding to Vietnam and Brazil as our first social business program, as Saskia mentioned. In the last 10 years, we've realized that social business is not just about philanthropy, it's not just about donations, it's about creating healthy ecosystems, in this case, creating ecosystems around healthcare. So it's the education, it's training physicians and healthcare workers to be able to treat patients, and then it's enabling access to medicines to treat the diseases they see. So in 10 years, 30 million people just in healthy families alone have been trained in disease awareness and intervention, and over 3 million patients have received access to medicine they wouldn't have received in a sustainable way, in a sustainable ecosystem. So when you start in 2010 with that ambition and deliver on that, we come from a company who believes that our job is to improve and extend people's lives. And so I think that's a significant advantage. As executives, we all believe that, not just because it's the right thing to say, but because we all come to this company with that same mission, vision, and purpose. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and so I'm passionate about what we're doing in our social business efforts for breast cancer patients around the world, particularly in low and low middle income countries where access to treatment is so difficult. And so what that means for me is that I create the space in the organization, the inspiration and the opportunity that from the bottom of this organization all the way to the top, a focus of everything that we do in our priorities is around social business. And that's why for Novartis, one of our key strategic priorities is building trust with society. And we lean in now on our ESG efforts. I'll just highlight one thing. We were talking about impact financing. So things that executives can do to send signals internally and externally. Novartis just announced a $1.85 billion social bond. The bond is tied to our increasing access and hitting our access targets in low and low middle income countries with our branded products between now and 2025. If we fail to deliver, we pay more interest. And we love being the first pharmaceutical company to be out there putting our business behind our social business, if you will, and saying quite clearly to the world that this matters to us.
Got it. Thanks so much, Shan. That was super insightful. So I hear from you, you do believe that it is possible to create that change
Absolutely.
from the role as an executive. And with that, like to hand over to Jayanth. You obviously are the chief mission officer at Essilor. So I guess the rest of the board must have given you the mandate to really drive the positive mission of Essilor. But I do still wonder if you really have the full backing of the board, and if in all of the decisions that you make, you really have the feeling you are able to drive the mission versus, of course, the financial returns that also a company like Essilor needs to deliver on. How are you dealing with those trade-offs?
Yeah, so sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Thank you for that great question. Well, I've been fortunate and lucky to be working in organizations like Essilor and Essilor-Luxottica, which strongly believe in bringing shared value across all stakeholders. Fundamentally, I mean, my own personal belief is that business and society are not independent, and they both need each other. I don't think there's any conflict between a business and a society. There shouldn't be one. And I think business has a role in working, in shaping and developing the society in which it operates. And its fundamental responsibility is to all its stakeholders, not just the financial shareholders. But in order to make this work, my own personal experience has been, you need to have a common thread which connects everybody. And this is where the whole mission, purpose, or raison d'etre, or whatever you may call, of the company comes in. Very often we see in companies that people... I'm sorry?
What is that in the case of Essilor, so everyone knows?
Yeah, so in the case of Essilor, our mission is to improve lives of people by improving vision. And in the case of Essilor-Luxottica, it goes a step further to help people see more, be more, and live life to its fullest. Now, obviously, we are in a vision care industry. We are fortunate to be making a product and service which brings a direct improvement in people's lives. So it's easy to kind of relate that to the business and the strategy. What we also believe is that basic good vision is a fundamental human right, and everyone has a right to see well. And when you have 1/3 of the world which cannot see well because they don't have access to eyeglasses or services, that's wrong. And that's where we believe that as responsible leaders, we have a responsibility in working with all stakeholders in solving this problem. And with the support of our board and our shareholders and all our stakeholders, we actually launched a roadmap to eliminate poor vision from the world by 2050, working with all stakeholders together. And this has been uniformly accepted by everybody. So I think for companies, it's important to discover the purpose and the mission, why they exist, and then make sure that the strategy is driven, keeping the purpose in mind, and all decisions that you take, whether it's green capex, whether it is working on ESG or employee shareholding or anything for that matter, is driven by that purpose, which is the sole thing which defines your existence. Once you have that, and once you have clarity, then I don't think there's any problem. It easily connects with all stakeholders. Like I said, I've been lucky to be working with organizations which have a strong mission, which believe in those missions, and it's been relatively easier for me.
Okay, Janet, so I guess also you're saying, yes, it can be driven by executives, that change can also come from the top, or it should come from the top. I mean, I've seen trade-offs, by the way, so please, for all of you, already start thinking in your mind where you actually have seen those kinds of trade-offs, because I do want to get back to that point also, where there are trade-offs between, you know, the social and societal impact and what the financial impact is. So we can come to that in a second. But maybe also now coming to you, Joachim, obviously when we met each other some years ago, I think you said, hey, I want to create a culture change within MAN, within the company that I'm now the CEO of. And I remember you telling me literally, you know, MAN is a culture of like German male engineers. That's basically how we work at MAN. And I want to make it more of a culture that's entrepreneurial, that also cares about society. And you've been trying to make this change. So what kind of hurdles, even as a CEO, you know, that supposedly has all the power to decide everything, have you faced in actually making a culture change within a company like MAN?
Well, thanks, Saskia. Well, I think the challenge is, I think on the one hand, it's important that you have a tone from the top. I think if the tone from the top isn't consistent and is not in line with what you want to achieve, you will never get to a change in the company. So I think it is extremely important. And I think from that, you need to make sure that actually the executives who are in the company, that they actually do help to make this change. So, and actually not only help, but also actually really are the drivers behind the change. And of course, and I think you had a good description of the company, high percentage of male engineers, very Germanic in a way. I think that the biggest challenge really is how can you convince more and more people that what you do is not just be nice to the environment, or you try to do something which is kind of like the taste of the month or something. I think, of course, the change to society in the meantime has helped there, because, of course, the pressure from the outside was also increasing from what you could see what happened over the last years. But I think that the main challenge is how can you get people to engage and to really pick this up, what happened to me when I talked to Professor Yunus and yourselves and so on, and to say, okay, this is something which really makes sense going forward. And how can I convince 50,000 people that this is actually a way to run the business in a much better, in a much better way going forward. And in our case, of course, we try to use a system in quotes, and working with you guys in having people engaged in such a process, and working with social businesses, in being mentors from traditional business side to work with social businesses with a different purpose. And I think this is something which was extremely helpful, and kind of like have the principle of a snowball, so you can actually infect the corporation with it. And that's why we did it for many years now, for 3 years in a row. And we believe that this is the right way forward. And of course, that starts giving the people the power also within the business to talk to the colleagues and say, look, guys, it's not all about only engineering a new engine. It's about what can you achieve with this, and how can you improve logistics and transport in a much more sustainable way than before. And that is what has to be driven from the top every day and every minute. And I think if you forget about it, and actually COVID is one of the issues here, because somehow this steps a little bit to the side, because COVID, of course, you think about cash flow all of a sudden, because you want to save the company. This is actually a big challenge now to bring it back once COVID is better under control.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also helpful. So again, also you say, you know, the change actually has to be coming from the top. The tone has to come from the top. So I'm just wondering, I mean, like, if now, I mean, you're all very convinced executives, and you're trying to drive that change, like, why are we not already in that perfect world where companies are really those net contributors? Why are we then actually still seeing companies polluting, companies, of course, not thinking in a way that is right for the society and the planet? Why is that? Is the reason just the capital markets that are driving you? And I'll come back to you, Shannon, because of course, as a chief legal officer, I'm sure you also have a lot to do with your shareholders and fiduciary duty, etc., as people are always citing. So tell me about that. Is it the shareholders that are holding you back, or are there other issues that are not letting you just be 100% impact driven?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because as you're asking the question, a couple thoughts come to mind, but maybe to orient a little bit in the facts and my own experience in dealing with our investors. I did 3 years ago, 3 ESG investor calls. I've done this year 21, and we're only in September. We did a survey of our buy-side analysts who cover Novartis. 80% of them now integrate ESG factors into their investment decision-making whereas they didn't even do that 3 years ago. And so we might be at a moment in time where we're in transition and you can't see the tangible results of that transition everywhere all the time. What I can tell you that change of thinking has done for us is, for example, we've established a trust and reputation committee which governs all of our ESG efforts throughout the company, and which allows us to constantly not say what trade-offs are we making to the overarching question that you asked, but what must we do to earn stakeholder trust. And our stakeholders go far beyond shareholders and what we're seeing from a shareholder perspective. So at least in the perspective of Novartis and how we're looking at these things, it is not a question of or, it is absolutely a question of and. It's the company that we want to be, and it's knowing every year we have to continue to reassess what's expected from us. When you look at the environment, and the pharmaceutical industry has historically been one of the lagging industries in leaning in and making environmental commitments, because I think the industry was focused on other things. And you saw starting in January of this year, the industry wake up and significant commitments being made, including our own commitments to carbon neutrality across own and third-party operations by 2030 that are ambitious, but that are embracing that the world is changing and we have to rapidly change with it. We didn't ever have a conversation about, but if we do that, what's the cost? It was, there will be a cost, but it's the right thing to do, because if we fundamentally believe, again, that our mission is to improve and extend people's lives, then part of that health is allowing people to live in a healthy environment, and we have to be responsible citizens to contribute to that environment beyond our medicine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that all sounds super positive and rosy, and actually shareholders are also not holding us back, which makes me, of course, very happy to hear. So at least there's positive trend. But Jayanth, now I think I'm pronouncing it properly. Coming to you, I mean, again, like we were briefly touching upon if there are trade-offs between social and let's say financial returns. And I mean, why are people like Paul Polman then saying that we need to move from short-term financial driven, let's say, decision makings to actually more long-term decision horizons? Like there must be some trade-offs that also you face within Essilor to say, hey, can I now do something positive today, or do I have to wait in the future? Tell us about those trade-offs, and if the shareholders are the ones that are actually driving this, i.e. the publicly listed companies particularly.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the shareholders, sorry?
Try to be critical, because I know you are facing these issues internally. I mean, it's happening.
I'm not sure whether I'm really facing those issues as you imagine, but anyway, I can try to tell you what I see on the ground, right? First of all, from a shareholder's perspective, I mean, I've been meeting shareholders for the last over 10 years. And every time we talk about what we do, and there is tremendous support. We've had shareholders doing roadshows specifically to countries like India, coming and spending a week with us to see these projects on the ground. And they appreciate the value creation which comes in there. And I echo what Shannon says, that over the last couple of years, especially this 12 months, the interest amongst shareholders, not only the SRI investors, but even amongst the normal investors and shareholders with big funds, sustainability related topics and topics like this are becoming the core for the shareholders to invest in companies like that. And also, you know, I mean, we're probably one of the few companies in our quarterly financial press releases, and you can see this for the last many quarters, we have a full 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs on what we do on emulating provision and the social business. And this, the shareholders love it. You know, I mean, if it goes to that extent that every quarter we give them an update and they really follow it and come back and ask us. So I think that's great involvement from their side. But I think the important thing is value creation, right? We are not here to deliver quarter-to-quarter results when we do programs like this. And people have to understand that there's a long-term value creation which comes in. I'll explain you in different ways. For instance, when we in the IKEA industry...
When you say value, Jayanth, do you mean financial value, or what kind of value do you mean?
Well, ultimately, there should be a financial value when you have businesses running for this. And like I said, both are not independent. I mean, doing good actually has to be good for your business as well, because you can't, I mean, then, you know, I mean, you're running a not-for-profit organization depending on grants, because you have to intrinsically do good, help the business to actually do more good. So in that sense, for instance, I'll give you an example. When we create access, when we create new wearers for the people who are living in the villages today, and we create first-time wearers, we are driving a story for long-term sustainable organic growth for the company over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And that's really, I mean, when you have 2.7 billion people being added into the consumer category, and they're not going to remain poor forever, and they will, at some point of time, start buying your products, your regular products, maybe in 10 years, 15 years. But then, you know, when you drive a long-term sustainable organic growth, there's a valuation attached to it. That's one thing. When you do green capex, when you work on reducing energy, when you work on reducing water consumption, and if you work in those societies, obviously it helps you in terms of improving your productivity, your efficiencies, and at some point of time drive your costs down. Likewise, I'll just give you one more example and probably then I'll stop, because you know, as in Essilor, we also have a unique governance model, which is so very important in your ESG perspective. We have more than 60 to 70% of our employees who are shareholders of the company. We actively encourage them to buy our shares. And so they have seats on the board, 4 of them on the board. So this creates a proprietary interest amongst the employees in terms of what we do on the mission or something. So like I said, they are all individual pieces, but they all connect together well with our purpose. When all that is well articulated and explained, then there's no real conflict per se. And I know I'm positive because not just I want to show that I'm positive, but it's because what I've seen and what's happening and what's being done. And I think this is a great way for companies to actually survive and help build societies.
Okay, good. It makes me also much more optimistic already, Jan. Thank you for that. So coming to you then, Joachim, I mean, what have you actually seen in the automotive industry? Do you have the feeling that shareholders are now assessing management now based on financial results only, or are they also slowly but surely integrating social and environmental concerns in their decision making when they invest in an automotive company?
I think actually maybe the automotive industry has been one of the slower ones, to make this change. I think when I looked at this 4 years ago, not many people are really talking about it. And then of course, I mean, you could argue that with the valuation of Tesla right now, with being the most valuable company, automotive company in the world, more valuable than Toyota or VW or anybody, you could actually argue that shareholders have understood that this is at least part of the story. I mean, of course, this goes beyond many other elements that they believe that this is probably the more successful companies going forward. But again, the automotive industry has been, I think, lagging there. Even though we in MAN, we quite early kind of like also published an ESG index. We kind of try to always also in the shareholder meetings, we try to explain our shareholders what we do on the ESG side quite early on already, but maybe not as focused as you should do it today. And I think as some have started doing it today, I think there's still a long way to go, quite honestly. I think it's still not on the forefront when you look at the speeches and read in the purpose statements. I think actually in the commercial vehicle business, maybe even more than in the passenger car business, because a commercial vehicle is not a lifestyle product. It's something which is system relevant and where you go from A to B to make sure that people do get their needs transported. And quite honestly, this was something which was very also outstanding during the COVID crisis, during the lockdown. So I believe that the normal automotive industry is actually still lagging. I think some of the commercial vehicle businesses, yes, I think they have found the way going forward. If you look at purpose statements, if you look at how they behave, and also in a company like I did, where we try to make this change, start with the change and actually look at this in our when we do our daily decisions, how can we make sure that what we do has a purpose.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I'm also just looking at the time. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I would love to actually ask you way more questions, but I think I have to, in the interest of the overall schedule, have to stop here. So I guess we've heard that obviously you believe that executives do have to make the change from the top, but of course that there are also challenges in getting it through to everyone in the organization. I think I've also heard from you that you all feel that actually shareholders are slowly but surely coming round and making it more easy. And anyway, you think that there's not a big trade-off, which makes me positive. apart from the automotive industry, which we're hearing is lagging to a certain extent. And I think through your experience with social business, all of you have said that that helps you sort of materialize your purpose in action and actually make people feel from the inside that actually what you're saying is also something concrete that you're doing. So I think that those were the key learnings that I'm taking away from this session. I'm super grateful for your time, and thank you so much for attending. And with this, I'll hand over to Daniel, who will lead us to the next session.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Saskia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel.
And thanks for joining us today. Feel free to also stay on a little bit, because I think what you'll see from Paul is going to be quite interesting. He's brought a few insights, data insights and structural insights to us. And I'm really happy that we have him today, because we've also talked about ESG criteria in the conversation just now with Shannon, Jayanth, and Joachim. And we also looked at studies and surveys, obviously, to see, is this narrative of that companies actually are performing better if they're performing well on ESG, is that actually relevant? And I think there's very mixed results out there. And the question is whether we should even be asking that question, or whether we should be asking the question from a moral imperative perspective. But one way or the other, I think we all agree that ESG criteria are coming only to a certain extent close to evaluating a company's impact. So I would like to hand over to Paul to look at what else we can look at in terms of how can we rethink evaluating companies' impact, and then also through that driving capital allocation in the financial markets. Paul will show us a few insights from Impact Finance, and then we also have time for questions both to our previous speakers and to Paul before we move to Mercedes and to Andreas.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. It was very interesting, and I'm very glad that we had this conversation with Shannon and Joachim and Jayanth. I don't want to mispronounce your name. Actually, before I go into the details, maybe a few trends of the history of what we call extra financial reporting. It's been happening for the last 15 years ago, where especially in Europe, we had pressure, the markets had pressure, and especially the issuers had pressure to tell more about what they were doing in terms of impact or negative impact, or how they mitigate the negative impact. And we had this first very free way that the market organized itself. And we saw the first generation of ESG, environment, social, and governance methodology within a market, financial markets, and within also third-party rating companies. And this really was all very good. It started the knowledge and the change of ideology. But today, the demand and the must transformation is to change these first notation agencies and methodology and try to fix their structural problem, to have and see a systemic change. Today, what happens is that we see the demand of the markets going through a very, very rapid change, where we need to have a very more rigorous way to do an impact assessment of the ESG data, where we don't only look at how a company mitigates its negative impact related to a common language, but also how a company integrates in their business model positive impacts. And also, we need to look not only at a portion or a small portion of a company's activities, but also to the entire activity of a company. And we are seeking, and that's the way we present it, is yes, we are seeking, and today it's the time to have the IFRS of impact. The same way in the financial market, we have the financial statements based on IFRS standard that is evolving year after year, but everybody uses the same standard to look at the financial performance. We believe that we will really be in an impact economy the day where every issuer, small, big, for-profit, non-profit, will have to mandatory publish their impact, their financial statement with their impact statement based on a universal, transparent and holistic, full view of the impact, negative and positive impact corporation. And that day will happen. It's not if it will happen, it's when it will happen, but we're in exactly what Shannon was underlying in this very rapid transformation. And I think COVID simply accelerated this ideology. We still have tremendous work, as I'll show you, but I think we are in this ideology world where it becomes not mainstream. We're not there yet, but at least we see it in big corporation that this is the need. And if I may, I think that everyone that really, and it all starts from the intention. In impact assessment, we always look, when we talk about governance, that's one thing, but what is the real intention of a board, of the leaders, of the individuals, of an organization, and go on and so forth. And without that intention, the rest doesn't exist. And I think that to have a systemic change and to see it happen, we need us leaders in that sphere push towards and agree, even if it's very difficult. I'll show you some numbers, and I think Shannon will be scared, and I'm sure and also will be, what is that? Well, we need, as Patagonia did a few years ago, take this risk of transparency and have this courage of showing the real thing, because we cannot be always misled by a super powerful marketing department like a lot of big companies have. Unfortunately, ESG today is about marketing what we want to say and not showing what we do not want to show. Unfortunately, that's not the way we will transform. So we believe that as Impak, we're a B Corp, a mission-based company. We try to figure out ways that will provide a systemic change. And our way is to provide a universal standardized way to measure the negative impact, the positive impact based on the most rigorous IFRS of impact that exists today, which is the biggest consensual initiative in the world, called the IMP, Impact Management Project. It's an open source, it evolves very rapidly, and it's the most rigorous way to do an impact assessment. And the beauty of this is that it's a convergence and consensus work of the most, the leading people that were in the ESG world, and now that is pushing towards this standardized universal way. So if I may, yes,
yeah, give us some concrete material and ammunition to work with. I think you have a couple of data points there.
So I'll show you, just to give you, and it's not there for, and I do agree, it's not about moral issues or judgment. It's about saying the first transformation step is saying, where are we at today? And how can we change this in the future? And how can we have a common language and we can compare apples to apples so that we can make the right choices? So today I'll show you what, I'll share my screen here. I'll show you the first quite impressive, I think it's impressive, and we had a lot of comments of, do you see my screen, Danielle?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
You may want to increase the size a little bit so that everybody can see.
Yeah, I'll try to increase the size, exactly. There you go. So what we've done is we apply today for private companies, for listed companies, we apply the same rigorous way to measure, and we created, based on this open standard methodology, scoring that is based on 200 points on governance, 300 points on how a company mitigates its negative impact, and 500 points, because that's the deal, how a company incorporates and generates positive impact. And we apply this rigorous IMP methodology that compares apples to apples, and we took all the absolute numbers and we transformed them into relative numbers, because an absolute number means absolutely nothing. Keep in mind that in the scoring business, we need to compare to see at the benchmark, the threshold, the evolution, the geography, and go on and so forth. So we came up with a score that is 0 to 1,000. And if you can imagine an impact-driven company like the one that the Yunus Foundation works with, their score are about 550 to 700 points over 1,000. It's very difficult to be an organization that is really mostly positive impact. But the average of the CAC 40, which are the biggest 40 biggest companies on the Paris stock market, the average is 222. So that shows you where a big corporation, and it's not a judgment, it's just the fact that when you're a big corporation and you've been in this Friedman ideology for the last 50 years, well, yeah, we've done stuff that has harmed and is continuously harming things. And it's a huge challenge. But this is the way that we need to look at is to for transformation. And the interesting thing is that we've done a lot of studies and data points and comparability. And today, when we do the scoring, we see that the leader on the CAC 40 is Schneider Electric for different reasons. And one of the main reasons is that, yes, they do everything correctly in terms of mitigating their negative impact, but especially they incorporate in their model how that their revenue is related to generate positive impact. And we always, one thing that I forgot to say is that we always use a common language. We transform that into the 17 SDGs and the 164 subcategories, which is a common language that everybody agrees on. And when we look at Schneider, we can pop in, and that's, we give a free access to everybody, every stakeholders to the summary, but we see that their main positive impact related to the SDGs and related to their business model. It's not enough to say we're doing good, etc., but what's the proportion related to the entire activity of your organization? And that's why we see a Schneider Electric that performs pretty good. And what are the negative impact that they're dealing with? And we see also under some other specific data that is a small ensemble of the biggest picture of the climate change. So when we have an entire picture, a 360-degree view of the negative and positive impact, we can come up with the climate change data, with other data that is relevant. So if we go, let's see, we have
Paul, just for everybody to understand, you work with asset managers who have a significant interest in going beyond ESGs and allocating their capital. Is that right?
Yeah,
what
correct.
kind of asset managers are you working with?
Yeah, so we believe that working with the asset managers that has a lot of pressure of their shareholders and stakeholders to come up with a real transparency and to avoid greenwashing, which we unfortunately see a lot, we start to understand, and these asset managers start to understand that having the right impact, qualitative impact data will help them better evaluate the real risk related to environment and social risks. And better, unfortunately, it comes back to financial aspects for most of them, but that's the first thing. And secondly, which is very interesting, with more qualitative data, they'll be able to see and invest in future winners, and so invest in real opportunities, business opportunities related to these impact data, because we've seen correlation between the corporation with more impactful scores that are more resilient and has a better performance in terms of financial performance. So that's very interesting. That's a real switch. So we help these. Yes.
And what are the recommendations based on your assessments, as we see Essilor Luxottica here, that you would give to Jayanth for Essilor and to Shannon for Novartis to take up tomorrow to even go the extra mile?
Well, I think that the first step to do an extra mile is to accept to look at the whole picture. And what they do, and especially Shannon and Yathan, they're doing fantastic things. But for a real vision, we need to put that in perspective of the entire organization. And that's essential so that we can compare apples to apples. And we can also trigger the evolution, which is Essilor is a good example. Their evolution over the years is fantastic. And they're fourth in the CAC 40. And they do have a real mission-based transformation mission. And so So the idea is really, yes, we need to have this courage of making sure that it's not a homemade methodology, that we seek the best in class third-party methodology, that it's transparent, that looks at the entire activities, and we're ready to compare not only to our peers, but also to the entire environment and to the entire sector in which we are, and the entire or the other organization in cross sectors. And I think that today, the asset managers and the banks for which we work, we've seen a lot of initiative coming from Europe, but over the last 6 months during COVID, we've seen the United States wake up. And an example of that is that yesterday, the big four, EY, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, they've published for the United States the wish list of having a standardized view of extra financial reporting for issuers in the United States. So they're waking up. And the World Forum also published their own white paper yesterday at the same time. So the movement towards this is going towards that transparent IFRS of impact. And that's where I would invite Shannon and any other high-level executive to push their corporation to have this courage to go through this difficult, yes, but necessary way to look at the real picture and publish it. And yes, I agree with Shannon that the stakeholders and the shareholders are ready to support these companies if they do have the intention of transparency and the intention of transformation. So that's where we work. It's difficult, and it's not a moral judgment. It's really to look at things and to transform things. The first level is to look at it as it is today.
Thanks, Paul. I'll have to cut you there, but I think it's a very interesting way to look at the impact, positive and negative, of companies. Maybe just Jayanth and Shannon, just as a very quick replique, is there something you want to reply to Paul on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Paul might be surprised, but we actually completely agree with him. Novartis for the last 4 years has been undertaking a financial, environmental, and social impact study on the impacts of our business on society, and we publish it annually in our Novartis in Society report. That's everything from GDP contribution to the impact of environmental pollution from own operations to occupational safety. And I think to be credible and truly committed in this space, you have to have transparency. And so much of what he just said resonated with me, because that's the decision we took 2 years ago to publish this at some criticism and inviting lots of questions from external stakeholders. But we would rather be transparent and have a dialogue based on facts, and facts, by the way, that are audited by third parties, so that we bring that assurance that this isn't just greenwashing, this isn't just marketing from a big organization, but this is a humble organization that knows we can continue to do more than we already do, but that stands behind our commitments and wants to transparently every year in our annual reporting suite show that to the world. So Paul, congratulations on what you're doing. And as the general counsel of Novartis, if we can do anything to get some alignment on ESG factors in general, so I can track, say, 30 instead of 330, we're all in to support you.
Great. Well, tell your team that we talked to about 2 months ago. We'd be happy to restart a conversation to help you out.
Great. Paul is good at selling here. That's great. But also, FYI, we've just very recently now seen a move by the Big Four to actually standardize the ESG criteria and come up with a standard system, which goes in the same direction. Just last week, there was a conference by the GSG with GRI and SASB talking about standardization and harmonization of these elements. So, as we all said, I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and if I may, Daniel,
can I?
Oh yeah.
If I can give Jayanth the word, and then I have to move on to Mercedes and Andreas.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Paul. And I think it's totally important. I agree with the transparency. And I think in Essilor, 5 years back, we took public targets on all the ESG numbers, and we actually made it. And every year we track the progress and we announce it, and we say how we are tracking and what we are doing, and also with relation to the SDGs, etc. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of transparency. But having said that, I think there's also a need for the IFRS equivalent of reporting as well as impact measurement. I must say that today in the world there are quite a few rating agencies and impact agencies which have their own methodologies and own ways of rating companies. So And I think as it moves, the world moves in this direction, I would be very happy to have a common set of parameters and common ratings rather than appearing in a few and not appearing in the others. And, we never really know. There should be transparency amongst the rating agencies as well. And there should be consensus building, I guess. And this is the way I think the world should move in the next couple of years.
Yes, I have to just finish by saying this IFRS of impact does exist. IMP exists, and they're underlying all these initiatives of convergence. So today, unfortunately, it does exist. It does exist, and I invite you to look at it. And that's what we're making available to you guys. Thank you.
Great. Let's look at the next couple of months and how that develops. Super excited to see your next steps here. With that, again, thanks so much, Paul, for sharing. Thanks also for Shannon, Jayanth, and Joachim for weighing in on these topics. We've seen now a lot of input from executives and obviously from the financial markets perspective, but sometimes, and most of the times, to be honest, change comes from within. As we said, executives have to set the tone, they have to set the mission, but we need individuals that actually make change happen. And we've looked at so-called social intrapreneurs, so corporate employees that act in an entrepreneurial manner within their company to develop new products, new services, or processes that have a social or environmental impact. And they're navigating that corporate immune system, as Gib Bullock usually calls it, or really the changes within the organization that are difficult because of the big machine that we're looking at. So happy to have Mercedes Andreas here. Mercedes leads the communities engagement at Ingka Group, which is the retail arm of IKEA. And she's partly responsible to turn IKEA's very ambitious sustainability goals into reality. So for example, and it's just one of them, IKEA wants to become climate positive by 2030, which is almost around the corner, as well as Andreas, who is director of nutrition at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's driving innovation in the nutrition in the private and third sector and public sector. And in his previous role, he already built on that, where he co-launched a strategic alliance for the fortification of oil and other staple foods. That's a mouthful, but the short name is SAFO. And it's been launched in his capacity at BASF that has reached over 140 million people through improved nutrition with private-public partnership approaches. Thanks for being online today, Mercedes, and thanks for being on the line, Andreas. Good to have you.
Thank you.
So I want to start with just a bit of an overview of your work, obviously, that you're doing every day. And as we've seen, it's not always easy to move a big tanker. We've heard from the executives what opportunities they see, what challenges they see. We've heard about the challenges in the financial markets to allocate capital. But what are the challenges and the opportunities that you see in driving sustainability and impact in your organization? And I'll start with Mercedes on that note.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share my journey. I must say that in my case that I always start with a positive opportunity, that we have an vision to create a better life for the many people. And it's not only to support customers to have a better life at home, it's also that to, in some ways, infecting the complete business and everything we are going to do. So I'm using this vision for every single meeting I have with my business colleagues. I decided when I joined to this position 3 years ago at global level is that I would like to move IKEA, especially IKEA retail markets, moving from corporate social responsibility towards social innovator. And we are still in the journey, and how we can really integrate the impact into the business development. And maybe this is the biggest challenges, because that when you have a huge machine like IKEA, that with around 400 stores in the world, in 30 countries, is quite complex to develop new solutions that we can scale up in 30 countries. But at the same time is that the opportunity is that we have the vision, we have the commitment, as you mentioned before, to become people and planet positive. And it's not an excuse for anyone not to explore how the business can be creating good for the business, but also for the people and the planet. And the opportunity we have now is that our colleagues in the business, at IKEA, they are looking for how to create this positive impact on the value chain. And my role is how to make it simple, at the same time creating good impact in the business.
And do you see the trade-offs between the margin effects of sustainability and doing good? I mean, we've been talking about, the communication to shareholders about, is there, improved long-term value creation? Can we look at more long-term goals? Is it the same conversation you're having internally at your organization as you're trying to drive change? Or are you still navigating quite a bit the challenge of creating a business case that lives up to internal return expectations?
I think that maybe the lucky I have is that we are not in the list market. We don't have shareholders. The complete profit from IKEA retail and Ingka Group is invested in the development of the business and in IKEA Foundation and investment in sustainability sustainability projects. But it's true that we have a responsibility. We are now 75 years old, and we need to prepare the next business model for the next generation of leaders. So we need profit to growth, and we need profit to create positive impact on people and planet. So I think that at least from my side, working in the social entrepreneurs side, is that I have the responsibility to develop solutions that can create positive impact on people and planet and profit, and also positioning IKEA as a purpose-led company. So I don't see the dilemma that sometimes I feel that because now we have seen like a huge moving around climate. Biggest companies are supporting climate. All of them have built a business case, and maybe we have something to do around inequality and how the companies can really create business case to tackle inequality using the business as a force for good. And I feel the opportunity here, and maybe it's together all of you, is that how we can really support the organizations to feel comfortable talking about inequality and what could be our role. And maybe this is that the challenges we have today, how to translate the opportunities to really create solutions that can be good for the business and good for the social part. Because I have this dilemma also that everything about social sounds sometimes like a charity. And I want to prove that it's not okay. We can really develop the business, we can really grow the business, at the same time create a social footprint around the stores, in my case.
I want to come back to that later, but I want to, in the meantime, switch over to Andreas. You mentioned that, sometimes social sounds like a charity, and Andreas made the switch from the company to a foundation. So I want to understand a little bit better, because you've seen different sectors, different approaches to solving problems. You've seen massive scale alliances like the SAFO. So how important are those collaborations? The theme of the EVPA this year is building alliances. So how important do you see the collaboration between the third sector, private sector, and the public sector?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. And also, I'm very thrilled to be here. I mean, having been more than 15 years an entrepreneur, I think it's great to look at that whole thing from the outside now a little bit, being with the foundation. And I think change has to come from the inside, and applaud everyone who goes on the journey and embarks on the journey of entrepreneurship. And I think it's also time for change from the outside, systemic change. When I look back on my 15 years working in the nutrition sector with a large multinational, I think the main lessons are, first, I mean, balance impact and the business case very, very carefully. And the business case, the traditional financial business case, is the license to scale. You can, secondly, redefine what is a business case. Yes, sure. And I was hardcore selling over 15 years, I would say, a broadened understanding of a business case with, I mean, indirect tangible benefits, like on the brand, on the employer brand, on reporting. And I think reporting is one pull factor, but if you're in the business unit people don't care too much about reporting at this point of time. So I think it's really a job of selling these synergies. And in the synergies, it's very important to look for 1 + 1 = 3. I mean, that's the creative, I would say, challenge for an entrepreneur, to look for synergies between the financial business case and the, I would say, impact business case. And here partnerships can help. I mean, partners bring additional resources, additional mandates, but they also bring transactional cost. I mean,
do you have a concrete example of a project that you've sold?
Yeah,
like this?
The SAFO project with GIZ. I mean, we partnered with GIZ over 5 years. It was a strategic alliance. Every partner invested millions in, I would say, in-kind and financials. No euro crossed the line, but both sides lined up. And nutrition is something you need public and private sector. Private sector sells nutritious foods, public sector creates a framework. So I think it was an ideal match for an area which you cannot tap into, a base of the pyramid, market, which I think you need public and private sector. But what I mean with systemic changes, we need to discuss a little bit, how can we make value to society becoming corporate value because the system incentivizes it? If I have reached in total 600 million people with essential nutrients, it doesn't change the shareholder value or the share price of that company. But if you lay off 20,000 people, it changes the share price. Something is wrong there. Is it okay to sell for a bit more money some essential vitamins to animals because somebody has a high value in these animals being sold? Or should I sell it for a few pennies less to people in Bangladesh starving? I think we need to kind of incentivize companies in the right way. And I know many people at the CEO level that have told me, Andreas, I would love to do more of that, but I need somebody giving me the mandate, the frame, and the corporate value in some sense. And I think that's, again, a government topic to discuss. Thanks.
Thanks, Andreas. That's super insightful and speaks a little bit to the tune of understanding that at the moment we see the narrative of ESG, a positive ESG performance, also leading to positive company performance, may not be the full picture. We need to look at what other value it's unlocking that we currently do not value in financial terms. And I think on that one, we very much agree. I want to ask one more question before we close, or we open up for questions from our participants here. When looking at your work, Mercedes, when talking to your colleagues and coworkers at IKEA, you just mentioned that social always sounds a bit like a charity. What kind of cultural change do you, or let's say cultural barriers do you see within an organization, or don't you see any to actually drive the whole agenda forward and to implement projects? Are we still even on an employee level too much stuck into the business as unusual mindset, or is there already openness to say, okay, no, we look beyond even our own personal incentive systems?
I think maybe that is our culture and values at IKEA, is that we have a very strong culture and values, and one of the values is caring for people and planet. So we have a mandate to do it. It's expected that all co-workers fulfill this value, and in fact we recruit based on values. And we have another value is called different with a meaning. So for me, I think, at least from IKEA perspective, we see that everyone would like to create good for the business, good for planet, and good for the people. But working in the sustainability, and in case in community engagement, we need to make easier for them how to make it happen. And sometimes it's the lack of knowledge, of competence around these topics. And in my case, that after 3 years, I can see that everyone I have met in the company has a very clear vision what they want to do. And they have changed, I can change in 5 minutes the vision about charity towards partnering solutions, because it's how we can really use the business and the growth and the strengths of IKEA to really make a positive impact in our communities, and why we should invest on that, and what is the return investment for the business, where our co-workers and customers are living in the communities where we are operating. So it's a clear return investment. So I must say that it's really important that the environment and the culture and the ways of developing the business can really help us to put this topic in the agenda. But at the same time, is for me one of the most important values that we have in IKEA, and I discovered in the last maybe 2 years, is simplicity. Sometimes working with business colleagues is quite complex, because business is complex. Sometimes the operations, the challenges, the opportunities, and our role is to find how to make this process simple. And my way of doing is that I always start with a super powerful story that they can see how their agenda can create positive impact on people. And then we agree in the first small, simple step, because we want to change we want to change our elephant. It's so big to transform a company, but we need to make easier the first steps. So for me, is that take your values in your company or the culture, find what are the main values that can really support you to put this in the agenda, and try to make simple the first steps to move the complete organization towards your vision.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mercedes and Andreas, for sharing. I want to open up for a few minutes here to the audience. Feel free to ask any questions, unmute yourself, feel free to ask the question directly, or put them in the chat so we can read them out. Do we have any questions from you? Otherwise, we have one here in the chat already. We wanted to wait for you to come online. No. There's one very specific question from Daniel Rostrup, GSG, to Paul. Do you work with the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative at Harvard University? And if so, how?
Yes. Yes, we do integrate a few of their elements. It's an evolving workshop. We do work with most of the initiative, should it be UNFFI, should it be the World Benchmark Association, should it be, we are very connected to the evolution, and the approach, the software approach that we have is to make sure that we integrate the most consensual way to measure and to benchmark every elements related to an impact assessment. But is it perfect today? No, it's not, and we'll be evolving. The evolution of the product will be, and the methodology will go on for the next 30 years. But it does exist. Coming back to a few comments of the corporate, it does exist, and it's on their responsibility, I think, to look at and search at what exists in the market. So yes, we do integrate with and work with Harvard University.
Great. There was also another question about your business model, and as far as I understand it, it's charging asset managers for asset allocation and
correct.
Yes. So that makes you independent of the company.
Yeah, it's very important, and we have a compliance statement. We make sure, even though we're a startup, and I like what also what Andreas said. It's funny, I was just reminding me, it's very difficult for a social business or impact business, a small startup, to focus and say, shit, I need to measure and do some reporting. Yes, it's difficult, but it's absolutely required, even though it's small. And that's one of our mission, is to make sure it's easy for small companies to go through a process that only requires a few hours over every year to at least have a picture of a third party. So I do agree, Andreas, it's very difficult to focus on other stuff than your operation to make it work and start reporting. But if you're into an impact world in changing things, key is measuring and communicating it with transparency, even so it's very simple.
Great, thanks. And there's another question from Lucy at Hystra. To Andreas, you've been both part of the profit and the philanthropic sides. How do you see the philanthropic sector supporting the private sector to best maximize impact? And maybe in the framework also of that, I know that a couple of participants here are working with corporate foundations, maybe even highlighting whether there is a way to strategically align between the two.
Great, thanks for the question. I would say a start is partnering with the corporate sector, and the corporate sector brings so many things to the table, which are typically deployed to commercial ventures. But if you want to kind of detour that to impact areas, I think corporate partnerships is largely underutilized. It requires a bit of a skill set on both sides. It's a technical discipline, so don't underrate what it takes to kind of puzzle that together and then lead it to impact. But it can really work if you do it. I would say with diligence and quality, these partnerships can help, I would say, to bridge from profit to non-profit areas. And ultimately, I mean, it helps if there's an exit strategy and something gets profitable after a catalyst time. More the large-scale market re-engineering ball game, I think regulation is largely underrated, and large companies, I think, discover that regulation is not always bad. It can make a best practice becoming good practice, a standard practice. At one point, it raises the bar, and corporates that, upfront invested in a new technology, in a better practice, in more sustainability, shape that market, and I think get into a pole position. And you even find that hand in hand with nonprofits maybe advocating for, a more sustainable market framework. But it requires on the public sector and also on the nonprofit sector, I think, a thinking to, which is more macro, like seeing the market and seeing what it takes to squeeze out bad practices and to kind of raise the bar for impact in society. And that's, I think a discipline where the right people are needed on both sides. And I hope that this kind of dialogue inspires a little bit, that more people come and take that up. Thanks.
Thanks, Andreas. Yeah, we all hope that the Green Deal of the European Union will make more markets than it will destroy. So for sure looking forward to that. And if you're interested in more of the work of the EVPA, of YSB, please do check out our websites. We've heard very interesting insights today from our speakers. I want to thank you all so much. We have to close now as this slot ends now from the EVPA annual conference. Thanks again for joining us. I was super impressed by the insights we got to extract from this. We wish you all a very healthy next couple of weeks. Stay sane, stay healthy, and we're looking forward to the next steps and to seeing what comes out of all of your work. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks also Saskia for moderating our first session here.
Thanks to all. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.